Just before 11:40 on the night of April 14, 1912, Fourth Officer Joseph Groves Boxall had just finished making a cup of tea in the officer's quarters when he heard 3 bells ring out from the Titanic's crow's nest. As he hurried back to the bridge, he heard First Officer William Murdoch order hard to starboard, and the jingle of the engine order telegraphs. Before he could even reach the bridge, Officer Boxall felt a shudder run through the ship. He stepped onto the bridge to find Murdoch turning the lever to close the ship's watertight doors and sounding the alarm down below. While the extent of the Titanic's damage was unclear, the severity of the moment was palpable. Within moments, Captain Edward J. Smith was on the bridge. He ordered Boxall to head to the ship's forecastle and inspect the damage. Boxall hurried down an emergency stairway to the well deck and descended to the lower passenger decks. He made it as low as F deck, and to his great relief, he found no signs of flooding or significant damage. Eager to deliver the good news, he raced back to the bridge. As he crossed the well deck, he noticed a small amount of ice scrapings covering the deck. He reported his positive findings, but Captain Smith was unconvinced and asked him to find the ship's carpenter and have him sound the ship. Boxall soon learned that the ship's mailroom was flooding. His hope was dashed. At around midnight, he was ordered to wake the off-duty officers. Third Officer Pittman and Second Officer Lightoller were already awake and realized the gravity of the situation when Boxall told them that the mailroom was flooding. Fifth Officer Lowe was in a deep sleep. Boxall woke him, but he almost immediately fell back asleep. By the time Boxall carried out the order, the lifeboats were already being prepared. He began helping the seamen unlace the canvas coverings on some of the forward boats when he got word that the lights of another ship were spotted somewhere off the Titanic's bow. Once again, eager to report the good news, Boxall raced to the bridge to look for himself. On his way, he ran into Captain Smith. He told him about the lights and asked if they should try sending a signal. Smith told him that a distress signal had already been sent and asked him to recalculate their position to make sure that their wireless calls were accurate. The mystery ship would have to wait. Reading the gravity of Captain Smith's replies, Boxall asked, "Is it really serious?" Without skipping a beat, Captain Smith replied, "Mr. Andrews tells me he gives her from an hour to an hour and a half." Stunned, Boxall raced to the navigation room to recalculate their position. Any shred of hope he had left was gone. The Titanic would sink, and from that moment on, every action he took was life or death. When he finished calculating their position, he passed it on to the wireless operators and then returned to the bridge to look for the ship that he heard about earlier. He quickly spotted a light on the horizon off the Titanic's port bow. Boxall identified that the vessel was a 2-masted steamship. He immediately went to the ship's Morse lamp, which was capable of projecting signals for miles, and began trying to establish contact. Captain Smith spotted the lights too and told Boxall to tell them to come at once. But the mystery ship didn't respond. Boxall decided to try something more dramatic. He took one of the distress rockets stored in the bridge and fired it from the starboard bridge wing. The rocket shot between 600 and 800 feet in the air and exploded in a magnificent shower of light and sparks. White stars slowly descended back down to sea. The rocket captured the attention of everyone on the Titanic's boat deck, igniting a new sense of urgency as passengers realized that the situation might be more serious than they initially thought. Boxall was soon joined by Quartermasters Rowe and Bright, and the three began sending up rockets at intervals of around 5 minutes. Maritime regulations were vague at the time, simply stating that rockets were to be sent up at short intervals to signal distress. It was a constant battle to keep people clear from the rocket detonators. At times, it appeared that the mystery ship might be sending a signal. Boxall and Rowe continued trying to make contact with the Morse lamp, but they could never make out any clear message from the ship on the horizon. By around 1:45, the men continued using rockets in the lamp, growing more desperate by the minute as the deck around them gradually descended into chaos. Nearby, Captain Smith was overseeing the loading of lifeboat number 2. He turned to the bridge and saw Boxall standing nearby, and he ordered him to take command of the lifeboat. A few minutes later, Chief Officer Wild ordered Quartermaster Rowe to take command of Collapsible C. The last rocket was fired at around 1:50, and with that, efforts to make contact with the mystery ship were abandoned as the Titanic began her final plunge. By the early evening of Sunday, April 14, 1912, the crew of the Leyland Line's cargo liner SS Californian began encountering icebergs. The modest combination passenger-cargo liner was sailing from London to Boston. She came in at a little over 6,000 tons and was operated by a crew of 55. While she could accommodate around 47 passengers, on this particular voyage she only carried cargo. At 6:30 p.m., the ship's 20-year-old wireless operator, Cyril Firmstone Evans, sent a message to another Leyland liner, the Antillean, warning that they had spotted 3 icebergs 3 miles to their south. Harold Bride, one of the Titanic's 2 wireless operators, also heard this message and reported it to the bridge. The Californian continued cautiously. Her captain, Stanley Lord, noted that visibility that night was especially challenging. Stars were repeatedly mistaken for signals, and with the sea so calm, it was difficult to make out where the sky ended and the water began. At around 10:20, the ship encountered a large ice field, and Captain Lord ordered the ship to stop for the night. They would wait until the morning light to maneuver around the ice. As he left the bridge to inform the ship's chief engineer, Captain Lord thought he saw the lights of a ship just on the horizon off their starboard side. But he wasn't sure if this was just an especially bright star. He told his chief engineer that they would be stopping for the night out of safety, but that the engineers should remain ready just in case. While the men spoke, Captain Lord glanced out the cabin window, and he noticed the lights of the large steamer heading toward them. The captain then went to the wireless cabin and spoke with Evans. He asked if there were any ships nearby. Evans told him that the only ship close to them was the Titanic. Captain Lord asked Evans to send a warning, letting the Titanic and other ships know about the ice field. Evans sent the message, "Say, old man, we are stopped and surrounded by ice." Cyril Evans went to the Marconi School with Titanic's junior wireless operator Harold Bride, and he was also acquainted with senior operator Jack Phillips. All 3 were employees of Marconi's wireless telegraph company. It was common for wireless operators to use informal language and shorthand when messaging one another. OM, for instance, short for old man, was frequently used to greet each other. Evans was also reaching the end of his workday, which started at 7 a.m. He was the Californian's only wireless operator. He did not start his message with MSG, which stood for Master Servicegram, the code for messages meant to be passed along to the bridge. The atmosphere in Titanic's wireless room at the time was completely different. On a larger ship, wireless messages were primarily a novelty for paying passengers. Communication between ships was a secondary function. The day before, the ship's wireless equipment failed. Jack Phillips spent hours working to fix the machine despite guidelines that suggested that he should wait until the ship docks for a technician to fix the set. If he had waited, the story of the Titanic would have been very different. When the machine was finally fixed, Phillips faced a massive backlog of messages that had to be sent to Cape Race. These were private messages purchased by first-class passengers. The signal from Cape Race was quiet and sometimes hard to hear. Phillips was exhausted. Suddenly, Cyril Evans' message blasted over his earphones. The proximity of the 2 ships made Evans' message extremely loud, easily drowning out or jamming the messages from Cape Race. Tired and frustrated, Phillips sent the following message to Evans. "Keep out, shut up, I'm working Cape Race." Much has been made about the apparent tone of this message. Some have even claimed that it prompted Evans to go to bed for the night, but this isn't true. Evans was already past the end of his shift, and he was wrapping up for the night regardless of what the Titanic said to him. He listened to messages until around 11:25, and at 11:35 on Sunday, April 14, 1912, Cyril Evans went to bed. In his testimony at both the American and British inquiries into the sinking, Evans did not express any anger or annoyance at the message he received from Phillips. At the American inquiry, Senator Bourne asked Evans if he thought the message was strange or if it was a customary message to send when someone breaks in to prevent jamming. Evans replied, if he was working, he had a lot of messages to get off. Cyril Evans understood the workload Phillips faced, and while the message sounds rude out of context, it was not strange or jarring for Evans, and it doesn't seem to have had any impact on his decision to go to sleep that night. Phillips never passed the warning onto the bridge, but ice warnings from the Californian and other ships had been delivered to the ship's officers earlier in the day. When Cyril Evans went to sleep, the ship that was by far the closest to the Titanic could not hear her cries for help. On the Californian's bridge, 3rd Officer Charles Groves spotted the lights of another liner at around 11:10 p.m., 10 to 12 miles off their starboard beam. It was clear to Grove that it was a large liner. At 11:30, he informed Captain Lord, who was napping in the chart room after 17 hours on duty. Captain Lord asked Groves to try and contact the liner using the ship's Morse lamp. Despite trying several times, no one on the Californian could make out any reply from the passenger liner. Then at around 11:40, the liner came to a stop and seemed to turn out some of her deck lights. The Californian's officers assumed that she simply stopped for the ice field. At midnight, 2nd Officer Herbert Stone assumed command. He also saw the liner's lights and guessed that it was only around 5 miles away. An apprentice officer, James Gibson, was also on the bridge that night, and he operated the ship's Morse lamp. Then Stone saw the ship fire a white rocket. A few minutes later, he saw another one. By 12:55, he counted at least 5. But he later insisted that he never thought the rockets were a distress signal. He informed Captain Lord about what he saw, but the captain simply told him to keep trying the Morse lamp and wake him if anything changed. He did not order his officer to wake the ship's wireless operator to try and contact the mystery liner. The sight made the men on the bridge uneasy. Stone said to Gibson, "A ship is not going to fire rockets at sea for nothing." And he also commented that she looks very queer out of the water. Her lights look queer. She looks rather to have a big side out of the water. Gibson would later testify that Stone went as far as saying everything was not all right with her, and even remarked that it looked like a case of some kind of distress. But Stone was adamant after the fact that at the time he did not think the ship was in distress, and he did not interpret the rockets as a call for help until after he learned that the Titanic sank. Instead, he thought they might be some kind of company signal. At 2 a.m., the ship's lights began to fade away, and they soon disappeared. Stone assumed that she sailed away. At 3:40, they saw more rockets to the south, likely fired by the Carpathia, as she was then speeding to the scene, sending up rockets to try and signal the Titanic. They didn't know at that point that she was gone. At 4:16, Officer Stone sighted the Carpathia. By 4:30, Captain Lord was awake and he took command. He began preparing the ship to maneuver through the ice field. He finally sent Chief Officer Stewart to wake Cyril Evans to see if he could find out what happened with the mystery liner. Evans almost immediately learned from the Frankfurt that the Titanic had sunk. The Californian was soon underway and sailed west for a time, before finally returning to the area to aid in rescue efforts. She rendezvoused with the Carpathia at around 8:30, after the Carpathia had already finished picking up the Titanic's survivors. The Californian remained in the area to search for survivors while Carpathia raced back to New York. All the Californian found was wreckage, abandoned lifeboats, and bodies. Soon, they resumed their course to Boston. Fourth Officer Joseph Boxall was placed in command of Titanic's emergency lifeboat number 2. Through the night, he periodically lit flares, hoping to signal a rescue ship. Finally, just after 4 a.m., the Carpathia appeared on the horizon, and Boxall lit a flare to flag down their rescuers. Once aboard, he was brought to the Carpathia's bridge. Shaking and on the verge of tears, he told Captain Arthur Rostron that the Titanic was gone. Boxall was one of many called to testify at the United States Senate inquiries into the sinking. He was the first to tell of the mystery ship that sat only a few miles away while the Titanic sank. It was immediately suspected that the mystery ship was the Californian. Captain Lord and the ship's officers were called to testify. They recounted what happened, at times somewhat defensively, and claimed that the Californian was approximately 19 miles from the scene of the disaster. Lord was adamant that while he and his crew thought what they witnessed was strange, they never once thought that they were looking at a ship in distress. There's a chance that this could have been self-preservation. At the time, according to the Merchant Shipping Act of 1906, it was a misdemeanor to fail to respond to a distress call. Both the American and British inquiries concluded that the Californian had to have been closer to the Titanic than her officers claimed, and the British inquiry went so far as to say that the Californian could have saved many, if not all, of the lives that were lost that night. But both inquiries stopped short of issuing any charges. Still, Captain Lord's reputation never recovered. He was fired by the Leyland Line in August 1912. While he found work with a less prestigious company, he was seen as a pariah for the rest of his life. Ever since the presence of a mystery ship was first mentioned, speculation and theories have run wild over the identity of the ship, Captain Lord's actions, and the exact location of both the Titanic and the Californian that night. Some have even speculated that there was another ship present and the Californian was actually not visible from the deck of the Titanic. But this theory seems highly unlikely since the timeline of what was seen on both ships align almost perfectly. Whether or not the Californian could have made it to the Titanic in time to rescue her survivors is also a subject of intense debate. The only certainty in the Californian affair is that Captain Lord should have woken Cyril Evans to use the wireless to investigate what was happening. Evans would have realized the situation the moment he began listening to his wireless set. But any blame on Evans is truly unfair. You can't blame someone for going to sleep at the end of a long workday. Almost immediately after the disaster, the United States passed the Radio Act of 1912, which required a 24-hour radio watch on all ships. Numerous other regulations followed, including standardized distress signals to eliminate any potential doubt. Captain Stanley Lord was widely vilified, and while his actions that night are questionable, he was not responsible for the loss of the Titanic. As the authors of Honesty of Glass so eloquently state, there are no villains in the Titanic story. So often, we want our stories to be black and white, with good guys and bad guys, heroes and villains. If we can find the evil, we can stamp it out. We can protect ourselves. But the Titanic tragedy, like so many other disasters, resulted in a long series of mistakes and misjudgments. What if the lookout sighted the iceberg a minute earlier? What if Captain Smith ordered her speed reduced? What if she carried 20 more lifeboats? Chance and circumstance don't care about our attempts to clarify the chaos of the world. Things just happen. We can prepare and plan and hope, but there will always be something we don't expect. Rather than focus on trying to find a villain, I prefer to look for the heroes. Fourth Officer Joseph Boxall and the rest of Titanic's crew responded to the unfolding disaster professionally and effectively. Their efforts saved hundreds of lives. Joseph Boxall spent the next 30 years of his life at sea before he retired in 1940. He was always reluctant to talk about the Titanic disaster, but he worked as a technical advisor on the filming of A Night to Remember in 1957. He passed away on April 25, 1967, at the age of 83. His ashes were scattered at the last position he calculated, the night Titanic sank. Thank you so much for watching. Believe it or not, this was actually my first Titanic video. I've always been reluctant because the ship has been so thoroughly covered, but the Titanic story is what got me interested in ships in the first place, so I knew I had to eventually add my voice to the mix. I want to give a major shout out to On a Sea of Glass by Tad Finch, J. Kent Layton, and Bill Wormstedt. Their book provides one of the most detailed and comprehensive tellings of the tragedy that you can find. You also probably noticed that I used several clips from the movie A Night to Remember in this video. If you haven't seen it, I'd highly encourage giving it a watch. They include a lot of fascinating details that the 1997 film cut out. I'd like to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon and my channel members for helping make videos like this possible. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Till the next one, be nice to people.